let me introduce ourselves. I'm Amir. I work as a data scientist at RBC. Previously, I was a postdoc at University of Oxford, and prior to that, I did a PhD in quantum computing at University of Toronto. Outside of work, I run, read, and cook and bake and that sort of thing. And yeah, so that's my website. You can see more about me there. And an article that I wrote about becoming a data scientist might be interesting to some of the people in the room, so check it out. Our first panelist, or one of our panelists, is Baiju Devani from Aviva. He is the VP of Analytics, and before that he was at IROC, and he has a master's in computing and information sciences from Queen's University. Outside of work, he does a lot of things, including squash and swimming, and you can check out more about him on his LinkedIn. And one of his favorite books is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but he also listens to a lot of podcasts, including A16Z. Our next panelist is Ozge Yılıklı from Microsoft. She's the chief data scientist there, and before that she was a data scientist at Microsoft, and she has a PhD in computer science from Dalhousie University.
Actually, a little correction. I never finished my PhD and got the diploma.
Oh, is that right?
I'm not a doctor.
So she did.
I feel so much better now because I really thought I was the only guy without a PhD on this panel. So if you saw me going this, that was a reason, and now I'm feeling a lot better. So thank you for not finishing.
Good.
Ozge does boxing, among other things. We're going to discuss that later. And you can see more about her on her LinkedIn. Also, she thinks that you guys should look at the Agile Data Science book as a very good reference. Then Amir Hajian, who is the head of research at Thomson Reuters Labs. Previously, he was a postdoc at CETA. He was an astrophysicist in the previous life, and he has a PhD in astrophysics. Outside of work, sorry, I don't remember what he told me. He added it last minute. He likes baking, coffee, and Scala. About Baiju, I forgot that in his free time he also does blockchain and writes his own smart contracts, apparently. And Lindsay, finally, is a senior data scientist at MoneyKey, and she is previously a PhD of neuroscience from McMaster University. Is that right? Yes, got it right. And you can see more about her from on her LinkedIn. And she thinks that Lean In is a very good book. I added it to my to-read list, so you should too. All right, let's get into it. So these are a summary of things that I told you. You could check them out. There is a link for Q&A. I guess it is repeated on the top. So if you have questions, go to that link and write them up. We are not going to take questions as we go on, but if you write them, I'll see them here, and I'll try to ask them if you find time. All right, so the first question that I have for you guys is, I would like all of you to answer that. Is the question, what is data science? And I think that's an important question because there's a lot of confusion about it. A lot of people from the business confuse it with other things. They think they're doing data science while you're not. And also that's very confusing for practitioners and people who are trying to become a data scientist because there's a lot of noise out there. So at first, I would like us to say very briefly what we mean by data science as we go on. So please take it away. Amir, do you want to start?
Me? Hi. So I always tell everyone that data science is like pizza, and you can, the same way that you can have anything that is two-dimensional and you put stuff on it, it can be called pizza, but you have good pizza and you have medium pizza and high quality pizza. It's the same for data science and data scientists. Anyone who works with data can is calling themselves data scientists today, but a good data scientist in my mind is a person that has the science part in data science and is taking that part very seriously, which means that a person who is able to find problems, solve problems using statistics, machine learning, good technologies, distributed computing, whatever is needed, and can go from the beginning to the end of solving the problems. It's very difficult to find a person like that, but that's the same as finding a very good pizza.
Go on, Beiju.
Okay, I mean, I'll just add to that. I agree with Amir. It's a lot of things. It's not any one thing. In my mind, there are three key things that I look for, and I wouldn't view it from like what I look for in one person, maybe in a team. If you can find it in one person, that's great. First thing is what Amir said. Like, you need to be able to reason through data, and what that really means to me is that you've got some background in inferential sort of reasoning. You can think in terms of probabilities, and so that you can, if someone gives you data, you can be scientific about it, right? Anyone can sort of give you some hypothesis and some results from data, but it takes a little bit of science to kind of do that systematically. The second thing that I think people miss out on, that I've learned in my career, is that to make data work at scale, you gotta have software engineering best practices, or even know what you don't know, right? And so I tell people that because you can write code, and if you're a data scientist, you're probably writing code, doesn't really mean that you can write software. And I think it's important to realize what we're missing there. So that's the second ingredient that goes in my pizza, I guess. And the third ingredient is really just a recognition that there is no deterministic path to the problems you're solving or the solutions as well. So you have to be okay with fuzziness. That's what a data scientist is okay with, and have that experimental mindset that allows you to sort of be okay with it and do something about it. So, that's really my sort of definition of data sciences.
Sounds great. Go ahead, Lindsay.
When I've been asked the question of what's the difference between data analytics and data science, I like to say that data analytics is looking at what we have right now, what data we have currently in our database, and deriving insights from that. And I would say data science would be taking that data and building a model and making predictions on what we don't know at the moment. So I think that's a good distinction between what data analytics and data science are. I'm just going back to what you were saying about what makes up a really good data scientist. I think that there are three major things. There's this famous Venn diagram that I've seen where it says somebody with really good statistical knowledge, someone who has programming skills, technical skills, not necessarily software development though, and then also someone who has industry experience. And I think having all of those together is really important for making up a really good data scientist.
I think everyone covered it really well. I'm not going to repeat the same words with my words. But one thing that I can say, what is not data science, is it's not machine learning, or it's not AI. And I see that a lot with with the clients that we work with. Like, sometimes we just have to step back and actually educate them on what this is and what this is not. Right. Data science is a lot broader, like exactly like Amir defined. Mm-hmm. It's not machine learning.
Sounds great. So by now we have a better understanding of what the panelists mean when they say data science, hopefully. But then there is the question that there seems to be a lot of hype around data science. Every business wants to do data science, and everyone wants to become data scientist. And that brings up the question, is that fair? Like, is there enough things for data scientists to do and things for businesses to look at when they want to create data science teams and do data science? Baiju, what do you think about that?
Do you have protection? Because I think I'm going to be heretical here and say it's a lot of hype. So I don't want to be lynched out of the room here. But I think there is. Of course, we're all here because there is something real to it. But I think it's also a lot of hype. And let me sort of let me argue for that and see if that resonates with the crowd. I see hype because hype exists on the extremes, on the two extremes of data sciences, and I'm talking about organizational extremes. On one hand, you have large organizations, and mine is one of them, which have this big problems that they can't solve. They have the scale in terms of the problems to solve them, but it has become a numbers game. We have 100 data scientists employed. And I ask people, if you've got 100, 200 data scientists, why don't you look up how many data scientists Facebook has? And I think the last estimate was 500 or 600. So if you've got 1/3 of the data scientists, if RBC or any other big organization has 100, 200 data scientists, you guys are in the wrong business, right? And so the point I'm trying to make here is that it's not simply a numbers game. And the second place that the hype exists there in that extreme is that while these organizations have this big problems to solve through data sciences or machine learning or AI, they haven't done the 101s, the foundational stuff, to actually enable that, to operationalize that, to bring those solutions at scale. So what ends up happening is that everyone has a lab, a garage, something of that sort. And I ask the question, how many of those problems or solutions make their way to your customers? The hype on the other extreme is all of the startups, right? And then you have very young, bright minds who are actually capable of solving the problems, but they don't really have problems at scale. If you're a startup with 1,000 clients, you should not be doing sentiment analysis. You should be picking up the phone and talking to every one of your clients, right? So, I find a lot of this, and I run, or at least I help vet through our venture fund at Viva. It's a 200 million pound fund, so we've got a lot of applications coming in, and we see this all the time, right? Like, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but you don't really have the problem to work on. So I think for the companies that it's real, are companies that have the scale of the problems and are able to actually do something about it, and those are very few and far apart.
What do you think, Ozga?
I'm a little bit more optimistic than Baiju.
Right.
There is a huge hype. Like I can't ignore that. There's definitely that part. And he definitely pointed out good parts there. And there's also the data scientist part too, right? There's also a hype there. Now everybody wants to become a data scientist without really understanding what that means, or what that means for them, or what that means for the jobs or companies that they're applying for, right? I'm interviewing a lot of people these days, and I can say 80% of the resumes that I'm getting is, I took Andrew Ng's class on Coursera. I'm like,
Yeah, I took that.
it's great.
So you're a data scientist if you take Andrew Ng's class. That's one takeaway, I think.
It's almost like the perception these days, right? So it is a lot more than that, right? And it's a lot more complicated than that. And you really need to put your time in it and work on it and really understand what that means, right? And again, for you and for the companies that they're looking for. So there's definitely that hype there, but I think that hype is also being created by the companies, like to Baiju's point, like I actually heard from a bank's HR saying that we're gonna hire 500 data scientists this year. And I was like, okay, what are you gonna do with them? They're like, we don't know. We don't know, we just think we're gonna need them. Like, and it's also that like, almost like worry that they're gonna miss the opportunity. Like they have to hire every data scientist in the market today in case they need them tomorrow, right? So there's definitely hype around that. But I'm also optimistic from the perspective it's not necessarily okay, Aurora, let's go do AI, but I really feel happy when our actually clients come to us with a real like a data business problem, and they're not even, most of the times they're not even really sure about machine learning. They don't even really have the teams to build it, but they really know their domain. And they really know that this is a big problem for them, and they know they have the data, and they're like, can we do something with that? And I'm like, this is actually a perfect problem. Let's work on it, right? And I think it's becoming like happening more and more. So I'm optimistic. The hype is there, but hype can be good to get us to the reality sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
So let me add something to that. I think I'm even more optimistic, and I would like to use the word excitement instead of the hype, because it looks like, see, everyone here who wants to be a data scientist, what are you after? You want to have a job that doesn't end, and you don't end up repeating the same thing over and over again every day. So people want to have an exciting job, and organizations want to find this new way of doing business with in a new direction that was not possible before, and now it is possible because we have machine learning and we have tons of data and we know how to use it, and good timing. And everyone is excited. There is a lot of I don't know going on. So that when you see that people are hiring at scale, and everyone is turning into data scientists, that's how I see it. I think it is the perfect time for people who are not computer scientists but want to get into the industry and do something good. But when you get into the industry, remember that data science is not a rigid thing. It is changing, and it's finding its own way, and it's evolving. So you have to be ready for that, and you have to find your favorite thing and your niche, and you have to continue in that way.
Sounds great. There is, I completely agree. There is a lot of nuances about how businesses approach data scientists and how practitioners approach data scientists, as all of you mentioned. But let's assume that a business decides that they want to do data science, and they have good reasons that convinces Beiju that that's a good reason to do it, or convinces, in terms of personal, convinces Ozge that that's a good thing to do. How do you go about building that team that can navigate the journey that Amir is talking about? How do you decide what is the right size for this team, or what is the right time to start that, or were there any challenges or nuances when you started building a data science team? Ozge, do you want to take that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at Microsoft, it's a little bit different in my team's case, so I can't really speak to that much because my team is a very client-facing team, and they work with different clients. But what I see with our clients is, and what I say to them is usually start small, right? And no, do not go ahead and hire PhDs right away. If you can, like, find that one person in your team who is a domain expert already, right? Who really understands the data, and most likely this person is already doing traditional BI, right? We've been doing traditional BI for decades, and those people really know and understand the data. And yes, they might be working with Excel sheets only. Yes, they might be only using Tableau or Power BI or whatever that visualization tool, but they are the experts in that data. And if they are in that hype, and if they want to become the data scientist, let them be. Invest in those people and start working with them. And that means just start today. If you have the idea today, just start today with them and see how much you can push for it. But depends on the priority and how fast things needs to get done, right? And if you don't have that 6 months time frame to figure this out, and if you really need to hire people, then depending on the complexity of the problem, that you might actually need very different skill sets. And I believe Beju just mentioned to this a little bit, like most of the times you can't find one person who can do everything, because when we're talking about a data problem, it starts with collecting data, storing the data. So it's like the right infrastructure for the data. Is this a Hadoop problem, SQL problem, NoSQL problem, whatever it is, right? So you don't start with the machine learning, but you start with data. And your machine learning person most likely won't really be the expert in the data infrastructure side of the things. So maybe you need two roles, which is more kind of defined data engineer and then data scientist. And on top of it, I always say you have to have a business domain expert in that team, because you can't expect hiring a generalist data scientist, which is the case these days, and expect that person to come in and understand your data right away in the first week and then start working on it. That domain expertise is really, really important.
Great. Amir, what do you think about it?
Yes. and it's the, so see, again, going back to the kitchen, if you want to run a very successful restaurant, right, and you go and hire 10 chefs and put them in the kitchen of your restaurant, you will fail, and you will fail immediately, right? Because when you run a restaurant, you need a chef, you need a sous chef, you need people, you need people who help you know, wash the dishes or do the grocery and everything else. And that is exactly true for a data science team. You don't need 15 data scientists on a team and no one else. For every data scientist, there are other roles that you need. You need data visualization, you need data engineers, you need UX people, which is very important if you want to do something properly. You need good engineers, and that's how you build a team. And a lot of you who are here, when you enter into this world, you will realize that actually the thing that I was interested in was data visualization, not data science. And I want to do that part instead of running machine learning algorithms. And that is, I think a healthy team is a team that has all of those aspects in it, and that's how you can work together.
I'll add one thing to that, and this is what I do every time before I get hired, for instance, which is to ask, before you start creating a data science team, ask the question, why? What is, and now since there are so many data scientists here, I'll use a terminology, what is the objective function, right? And ask that to the business that you're getting hired with. What is the objective function of what it is that you're trying to do? Why do you need data sciences? And be like that annoying kid who keeps on asking why, and why. And eventually, if you get a good answer to that, the rest falls into place.
Sounds great. Like it sounds to me that you guys are talking about a very important issue, that is the composition of the data team is very important. You have to have a data scientist plus many other roles that put the data scientist in context. And that sort of diversity in the data teams is sort of provides the right ingredient to be successful in data science. And that brings up the next question, that what is the importance of diversity in data science teams? Like, why diversity in general we know is important, but for a data science team specifically, what do you think is the role of diversity? Lindsay, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think that on a data science team, it depends on the size of the company, right? So some companies like Facebook have hundreds of data scientists. So those teams need different, I find that a lot of the best companies have teams where it's kind of like a mini startup within the company. So you have so Facebook Messenger has a data scientist or a little team of data scientists and a project manager and a few engineers, and you're kind of working as a team like in that sort of structure. At MoneyKey, at my company, I was the only data scientist for a long time, and so I was my own team, and because of that I was doing full stack data science, so some data engineering stuff, some traditional BI, and then predictive modeling. But I find that the question was just about diversity. I think that when you're choosing data scientists, it's good to have a team that's made up of not just people with PhDs or statistical backgrounds who can think about the hypothesis test properly. I think it's important to also have domain level experts working together. And I find something I wanted to bring up was that if you had a team of all PhDs, who here has a PhD or comes from academia? Yeah. And who here has found that in your doing your PhD, you were taught to just work independently and be really competitive, and you got to publish, and you can't show anyone your work? I found that was my experience, and transitioning from an academic background role right into data science at a business, I found that I quickly needed to learn how to work with others, and as the only data scientist, I had to go talk to other experts, business managers in different parts of the business, just to understand the data that I was working with and what the important questions were. And now that my team has grown, I've had to work more as a team and rely on the other data scientists on my team to come up with better answers, and I find that you need to work as a team, and on your team, it would be better to have a diverse team. So that's what I think.
I'd like to add on that, like from social aspect of it, right? Like diversity in the sense of the diversity that we use every day, gender, social background, racial and such, right? And this might apply, this probably wouldn't apply to small companies with like 1 or 2 people in their teams, but especially if you're a company with a social impact. I think it's really, really important to have that kind of diversity, social diversity as well, right? If you're working in public sector and social innovation in any of those cases, I think it's very valuable. Like one story that I was actually hearing last month at Strata Data at a panel, and they were talking about this kind of diversity in data science teams, and one of the stories was one group actually built a model for detecting a disease specifically, and it worked great in training, and then when they were testing in real life, it miserably failed, and then they couldn't understand why, but when you looked at their training data, it was actually all white Caucasian training data. So then they realized basically that model started failing on all Latino population, African Americans and Asians, right? It was like an eye opener. So if you really have a social impact, or if you're a public facing company, I think this is really important, because if your team looks like the same, then they're gonna think the same.
Yeah, definitely very, very important points.
I would add one thing to it. I think we've talked a lot about data sciences being a science, right? But I think we forget it's as much artistic, and what I mean by that is it requires a lot of creativity. As I go back to that idea that your problems are not well defined and your solutions are not well defined. And if there's one piece of research that's clear, is that diversity leads to creativity. And that's one of the reasons why I think we need diversity in any team.
And when people come from different backgrounds, technical backgrounds, as opposed to all of them coming from the same department, the same, let's say, computer science department of some university, then you see that when things start getting ugly, and when you have to do that hard work that is beyond coming up with an algorithm, and you have to go clean the data, find it, clean the data, talk to the customer, bring it, build the whole thing, and then go present it to the stakeholders and be patient and come up with different ways of putting it in front of the customer and explaining it to them. That's where you see that people who have different technical backgrounds and like social sciences or natural sciences that are traditionally looked at as non-employable people, right? If you become a professor in a university, or I'm sorry, there's no job for you. That is where they can make a huge impact because they are looking at things differently and they have the expertise for
Definitely.
Until recently, I think physics was one of those things as well. Made you non-employable, but
He's an astrophysicist. He's safe.
that was a nice.
That's
man.
very different.
Sounds fantastic. Like very, very interesting points there. So now let's assume that you decided what the composition of your team is. You decided that you need this many data scientists, this many data engineers, and other support roles, and you're going to go out and hire these awesome people. What do you ask them in the interview? I'm curious to hear your favorite interview questions. Perhaps one with which you probe technical skills and one with which you probe soft skills. Ozga, do you want to?
Sure. Well, there are a couple of things, like there are a couple of things important for me. So the first part is like people and the teamwork, right? I just saw this the other day. It's kind of cheesy, but it was saying on Twitter or LinkedIn somewhere, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I do agree on that. To me, team culture is one of the biggest things. So I actually really look at the fit for the team and for our clients and such. So in that case, it's really not just one question, but it's honestly the first 10 minutes of the interview. And I hate to say that, but sometimes it just clicks and sometimes it doesn't, right? And it's not, again, it's not one question. Obviously technical skill is important, but what I look for is not necessarily one technical skill over the other one, but a must is either Python or R skills. If you don't know Python or R, I'm sorry, we can't do anything, right? But if you have one, and if you're working on another one, or if you've looked at the other technologies, then it's all good because I hire people and trust them that they're going to keep learning and they're going to keep improving. And data science is one of those areas today it just keeps growing. It just keeps improving itself. So you can't really stay static. You really have to be on the move all the time, right? And again, just specifically for my team, because the data scientist that I'm looking for is kind of like a weird mix of the technical people with very high communication skills. But when I say it's not just the teamwork and team communication skills, but it's above and beyond that, they're supposed to be able to get in front of our clients and talk with people changing from like the levels of data scientists to VPs, SVPs, and sometimes CIOs, CDOs, right? So that kind of skill set is really, really important for me as well. But one typical question that I ask at every interview is, hoping that they pass the first 10 minutes, is a very open-ended case study. Like, I don't do hands-on code writing. I don't give studies, like send them home and then expect them to come back to me next day. It's just one open-ended case study because I really want to, and it starts with like, the client has this problem. How do you move forward with that? So they need to be able to ask, what are the requirements, and then figure out what is the right technical solution. And so basically, like seeing that thought process end to end, it is very important to me.
Baiju, what do you think?
Well, now I think I can pass the Microsoft interview. But you know, I don't think I have one specific question. Again, going back to that, depending on who you're hiring at what position, makes a difference. Obviously, there are some hard skills, and I'm also looking for Python and R core competencies if I expect that person to be working hands-on with building models and so on. But what I try to do is really have a conversation. And for me, you know, the initial conversation is around, are you able to hold a conversation around data sciences? This is the kind of conversation we're having here. And I'm looking for that well-rounded individual who can hold a conversation beyond whatever technically he or she is good at or really wants to talk about. And then if you go beyond that, I tend to pick up a paper and send it to the candidate and say, well, why don't you come in for like a paper review kind of conversation? So we do well. It's actually a lot of fun because it forces you to read the paper. And as I went away from academia, I read less and less, and I got dumber and dumber. So it's actually a good way for me to catch up on whatever is happening, and it does make sure that if you're gonna call that interview candidate again, you're committed to that as well as an interviewer. Like, it's all easy to like take 1 hour away out of your schedule, but it's harder to say, I'm gonna read a paper for 3 hours and then interview someone or have a conversation with someone for 2 hours. So I think that works well. It's like an oral exam, you know, and I think those work well, and then having some sort of a time pressured, you know, write your sort algorithm or whatever it is. But if there's someone junior we're hiring, then, you know, then maybe that is appropriate as well, so.
Interesting. Do you guys want to add anything to
Yes.
that one? Go ahead.
I just want to say that I think that a data scientist at MoneyKey specifically, we're not client facing, but you do need to be able to give a presentation to non-technical people, and I just want to stress that. I think that having the skills of communication to the head of marketing or the head of operations is really important, to be able to talk to them, understand their data needs, and go back, look at the data, and show them what they need to see, even though they might not necessarily be able to describe it. So I think that that's an important skill that data scientists need to have.
So we have a multi-layer interview process that the candidate goes through a lot of different stages to check a lot of different things. But what I do, my favorite interview question is, tell me about a time when you had a conflict. No. I just ask the candidate to walk me through one of their, I say, pick your most interesting project that you have done since you were born, and walk me through that. And that is, so I have discovered the best candidates that way, and it never fails, because that immediately gives the candidate the chance to show you what exactly they can do, and what technologies, how they think about problems, how they communicate, and then there you can see that there are some people who are just not, they can't do it, and some people are, they come ready, and they open their laptops and they say, look, I built this, and this is how I did it, and it works, and that you immediately see that, yep, that's what I want.
Sounds great. Now you have all your cheat questions to ask. So a lot of the sort of skills that you talked about come from the personality of the person that is interviewing for a particular job, but a lot of it also comes from experience. And for example, Lindsay, I know that you teach at BrainStation, and people, I know that you deal with a lot of people who are at that stage of coming out of school and starting a new job. And a lot of these people don't have the business experience. What do you think about that? How can they go about filling the gap? Is Andrew Ng's course enough? Is Kaggle projects enough? What should they do? They're just coming out of school.
Yeah, I've been asked that question a ton, especially by students at BrainStation. And by the way, here's just a plug. BrainStation's a great place to just take a course, data analytics and data science. So I think that if you're just coming out of school, as I mentioned before, the Venn diagram of what a great data scientist is having the statistical skills, the programming knowledge, and also the industry experience. But if you're lacking that industry experience, I think doing Andrew Ng's course and learning Python or learning R at home with really clean, unrealistic data sets is one way to do it. But I think to really build on that, you need to get out there, come to meetups and summits like this one, so you guys are already doing the right thing. And I think it's important to talk to people, other data scientists, find out what they do, because you'll notice that people who call themselves data scientists it's such a vague term, and everybody has different day-to-days. And I think that it's important to understand what different types of data scientists do. Another thing that I recommend doing is taking a course in person. And the last thing I would recommend that I think is probably the most important is just get into a company at a junior level. And I just want to give the example of one of my coworkers. He started at MoneyKey as a call center agent, and he worked his way up. And he came from Waterloo with a math background, and he just wanted to get in and get a job. And he worked really, really hard, and he showed his interest in analytics. And so I would say getting into a company that has a need for analytics is really critical if you want to transition your role into more of an analytical role. And now he's at the point where he's running business intelligence for the operations team. We use Domo business intelligence tool. It's really great. It's an alternative to Tableau. And he's learned all these SQL and tech skills on the job just because he showed an interest. And so now he has that data analytics and data science background just because he created that job for himself. So I would recommend doing something like that. And I think a lot of people might not necessarily think that that's a way to get in.
Amir, do you want to take a shot?
Yeah, so I would say that pick a problem that you're interested in and start building something around it, and teach yourself everything that you need to learn to solve that problem. And so that makes this process of learning, we have all spent hours in universities and schools, and you know that sometimes it's not really fun. But to make it fun, pick a project that you're really interested in. You're interested in baseball. Go find a way to scrape the baseball web pages, download the data, clean it, and come up with a model to predict what will happen in the next game to your favorite team, right? And then that way you'll start learning all the technologies, the science behind it, and what you need as a data scientist. And then you also will realize maybe this is not the thing you're really interested in.
I really love what Lindsay had to say there, and I totally agree with that. And on top of it, the other thing might be you might already have a job. You might be a software dev today. You might be a BI analyst. You might be doing something already and looking into switching to data science. And in that case, I really suggest that you find that one extended project. It's not your job description. It's out of your role, right? But it will push you to get into this data science world and actually use your company's data, so your real world data, and then get experience that way, right? And that way then you can actually also show that you have the potential, you have the desire, exactly what Lindsay was saying in her example, and then move it that way, right?
I mean, I agree with that, and I'll give you an example, and you can get into funny places and for funny journeys as well when you take that path. You talked about me writing smart contracts and blockchains. The only reason I got interested in blockchain was that there was free data there in terms of all of the blockchain exchanges actually give you free APIs, which financial markets don't. So I started looking at cryptocurrency data, and it was just a circular path around data. Eventually I started writing smart contracts, and sometimes that take you to funny places. So I got invited to sort of talk to the board of directors of CIPF, which runs all of our insurance for all the deposits you have. When they invited me, I was like, what? Why me? And they're like, oh, we read something you did around blockchain. So it takes you to funny places, interesting places. Sometimes it leads nowhere, but worth a shot.
Yeah, definitely. What is a lot available on internet is data sets. So, for example, if you guys play with a Kaggle competition data set, go at it, think outside of the box, and think, what else can I do with it? And there are so many open source data sets that you can play with it, and hopefully something interesting comes out of it. So we talked a lot about what you guys ask candidates. However, there are a lot of people who are potentially considering jobs and companies to join, and a lot of practitioners here that are potentially considering changing jobs for whatever reason. And one of the things that I think is very important and a lot of people don't know they should do is asking questions in interviews, or even before getting to the interviews when they're considering a company and a team to join. A lot of times people think about, I want to join that company rather than a specific team that they're going to work with. So what are the important questions that people should ask when they're considering a role about the company, about a specific team, about their colleagues, and their manager? Amir, do you want to take a shot?
So the most interesting thing I heard when I was looking for a job, for a data science job, was that remember that when the interviewer is interviewing you, you are also interviewing the interviewer. And that's your chance to find out about what exactly your life is going to be after this. And so the important questions are, who am I going to work with? What is the team like? And what are the problems that you're solving? And that most of the time they actually tell you the truth, but you don't hear it because you're thinking about your ideal thing, and you say, oh yeah, they say you have to clean data. Maybe they mean I'm going to do awesome machine learning here. And so, but no, just hear what they are saying. And again, my favorite question: ask them to walk you through the most exciting project that they have recently done, and listen very carefully and ask a lot of questions about it, because that will show you everything about that company and that team.
I mean, you can ask a lot of technical questions like team culture and this and that, right? And they're all good. But one thing that I've learned firsthand in the last few years, especially at Microsoft, people work for managers, not necessarily the company. And you might think you're going to work for the company when you get into it, but that is really not right in my experience. Your manager is really the immediate person that you're going to deal with every day, and they're going to decide if you're your success in that company one way or another, right? So I think it's really important to actually get a call with the hiring manager, right? And if you're not lined up for a call with the hiring manager, I would actually ask the recruiter, saying that, can I chat with the hiring manager, right? And then actually learn it from that person and see if you actually connect with the person. Like when Microsoft called me up, I didn't apply to Microsoft. Actually, I've never applied to any job in my life, to be honest. But when they called me, I was hesitant. I was coming from a startup. I was like, yeah, I don't know about Microsoft. But that first call with the hiring manager was basically, I want to work for this guy, right? And now when I'm hiring people, I actually, on purpose, everybody who's interviewing for my team actually goes through me first. I have the first 30 minutes with them, and if they pass through me, then they go through technical interviews, because my team's time is a lot more important than my time. And during that 30 minutes, I'm basically looking for that connection, right? Are you just going to be a good fit? Are you asking the right questions about growth? Like, I think that's really important. Like, it's good what you're going to do today, but I really love it when someone comes and asks me about the growth opportunities, because that tells me that they are aware that this area is not an easy peasy job and they have to really keep working every day.
Right. Do you guys have anything to add?
I think it's extremely important for the people, when you're interviewing at a company, for you to really research what that company does beforehand. I find that just interviewing some people, it's been interesting to see that a lot of people don't fully understand what my company does. And and I would also say some more advice. If you're going out and interviewing for jobs, you should definitely go on YouTube and see if any of the data science teams have given talks recently and watch all of them. See if they've published any papers, read them. So you're bringing that up in the interview instead of them telling you about it, and then you can showcase your knowledge.
But please go beyond that. I read Satya's last book. I'm like, great. So the other million people in the world, thank you.
And remember to pronounce the name of the company correctly when you're talking to the people. And spell it correctly when you're writing emails. If there's no P in the name of the company, don't put a P there. Thank you.
Do you want to add anything, Baiju? Or?
No, I think this guy's covered well. I mean, the only other thing I would say is that depending on the size of the organizations, try to figure out if you can talk to people who the data sciences team works with closely, whether that's on the business side or most likely from the engineering side. Like, how well do the engineering team and data sciences team work well? And I think that's critical to success for many, many data sciences kind of teams, and it's good to figure out, what kind of dynamics are there.
Fantastic. We have only a few minutes left, and I am checking the questions, and there are not many. Oh, really?
Well, we have to take it real time, I guess.
Oops, sorry.
If you speak loud enough, we'll take the question.
All right, let's take the last question that I have here, and then we'll go to audience if there is time left. Okay, so so my last question for you is, so I know you gave the audience a lot of good advice, but let's wrap it up with one last advice. What is the most important thing that you wish people you interview knew? And that's, let's just wrap it up with that. Yeah, do you want to go at it, Amir?
Yeah, so the most important thing, especially if you're coming from that academic background, remember that where you're going to interview, they are not looking for this scholar person who knows everything and can talk about the philosophy of the, or can solve everything. That company who is going to hire you, who is interviewing you, has problems. And there is a reason that they are interviewing you, because they want you to go and help them with that specific problem. If you can convince them, if you can figure that out and convince them that you are going there to help them to solve that problem, you have that job. And if you don't look too terrible during the interview, if you just convince them that I'm the person who is going to help you solve your problem, that's it. You have the job. So be confident. Go there. Figure out what the problem is, and tell them how you're going to solve it for them.
Well, so I remember the time when I came out of grad school that data was not sexy. It was certainly not a pickup line that it is right now, that I'm a data scientist. That's what young people tell me. But I remember it was not a sexy thing. But what I wish people know is that even today, data sciences, when you actually go in and become a data scientist, most of the time, you're not doing anything that's that great. You're cleaning data, you're just a glorified SQLer, most of the time. So there's parts of it that would make you feel like, what's going on,
I love your optimism.
But here's a but, right? I'm actually more optimistic than I let out to be. If you're passionate about data, which a lot of us are, you really want to do something big with it, you really want to solve big problems with it, then there's so much out there now that you can do. You have computational power, you have storage, you have elastic compute, you have problems, you have organizations throwing money at you. And data at you, and problems at you, that there's so much you can do. But you got to be passionate about that thing, right? There's always an ups and downs to any cycle like that, and so that would be my advice. And go be with it if you're really curious and about data and excited about data.
Lindsay?
I feel like the So the best advice going into a new job or an interview, I think it's true that you need to realize that you're going to get in there and you're not going to just wave a magic wand and solve everything with machine learning. It's true that I think the stat is about 70% of the job of data scientists spend their time just cleaning data, pre-processing. Data janitoring is the term that I like to use. And I think it is important to be realistic when you come into a new job, or if you're doing an interview for a data science position, to realize that another important thing is you need to also realize that you can have a huge impact doing just regular reporting, basic statistics. You can take your company, I think, almost 80% of the way there, and then you can fine-tune it with more machine learning. So I also just want to mention that so at MoneyKey, when we look at, we do online payday loans, and we look at thousands of applications every day, and basically we just have to find out if we're going to accept or reject a lead, and we have to decide very quickly. And just by doing simple looking at historical data and seeing how many people with this attribute have defaulted in the last 30 days, like basic stats can just help us make a huge impact in which customers we should be accepting or rejecting. But then what we're also doing is using hardcore data science and building our own custom models to take that to the next level. So I think there's a little bit of both as a data scientist, and I think that's an important piece to keep in mind.
This might sound to no-brainer for some of us, but don't burn the bridges. So if you're going through an interview and if you realize it's not going the way that you were hoping that it's going downhill, don't get upset. Don't get defensive. Instead, just like when you realize if they're cutting the interview short or towards the end, if they ask you, well, if you had any questions, just ask them for their suggestions. Saying that, hey, like, what are some of the things that I can improve, right? Like, just approach it that way, and please do not get defensive, because I might have seen 100 resumes in the last 2 months. I might have talked to 30 people in the last 2 months, but I would remember that person. I will remember that one person, and they're not gonna forget you, and this is a small community in the bigger scheme of things, so just be careful with that.
Life lesson.
That's true. And related to that, if they ask you, do you know this, or have you done this, think about it, and if you see that is something that you're interested in, replace your no with no, but I would love to learn. Okay, and you have no idea how many candidates come and they say, nope, are you going to learn it? Nope. Then what can you do?
All right, fantastic. I like to emphasize a point that a few of you mentioned, that this is a very small community, and you obviously don't want to burn your bridges. But on the other hand, this is a small community, and as Ozga said, she never had to apply for jobs because she networked. So network away, and this is the best place for doing that. Sorry that the audience questions didn't work. Hopefully you can ask questions after this. And one last point is that all of these folks are hiring. So come over and talk to them after this. I guess I put this up here, you can read it, and that's all for us. Thank you.
And you know the interview questions as well, so.
I helped you. All right, thank you, that's all. Thank you guys, it was fantastic.